Hi, I'm Sean Perrin, and this is episode 68 of the Clarinet Podcast, the show where I discuss all that's new and neat with clarinet with the neatest people in the industry. In today's episode of the podcast, I'm joined by the wonderful Brad Behn of Behn Mouthpieces. We focus on his epic line of mouthpieces that feature reverse-engineered proprietary rubber, O-ring tenon connections, and are available in tilted ergonomic designs. But we also touch on his barrels, bells, reeds, and some of the really wonderful things that he's planning for the future of his company. His approach is all about getting more from the instrument with less effort from the player, and his artistic wisdom and vision is truly inspiring. Patreon Gold backers will get access to a high-resolution audio, ad-free, extended lightning round version, and early access to today's episode. If these are things that interest you as a fan of the Clarinet Podcast, I encourage you to help support its ongoing production at www.clarinet.com/Patreon. Thank you so much for listening.
Sanding, shaping, balancing. For centuries, mastering your instrument meant mastering these crafts too. But now, D'Addario is refining craftsmanship for the 21st century by refining their reeds and mouthpieces with the world's most innovative techniques, so you can spend less time sanding, shaping, and balancing, and more time perfecting your own craft. To learn more about the new era of craftsmanship from D'Addario Woodwinds, visit d'addario.com/woodwinds.
So I'm here today with Brad Behn from Behn Mouthpieces. Welcome to the show, Brad.
Thanks, Sean. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, that first statement I just made, I'm feeling that's almost kind of not correct. You have so many different products now. How do you identify your business these days that you make mouthpieces, barrels, reeds, all sorts of other accessories?
Yeah, I started out as a mouthpiece refacer and then broadened that into a mouthpiece company. But over the recent couple of years, I've augmented my lineup to include, like you say, barrels and bells and reeds and accessories. And so we've changed our name to simply Behn, B-E-H-N, and then the official name is Behn LLC. But that allows us more freedom as our product line grows, expanding to so many different areas. To simply remove the word mouthpieces, it gives us more range. Although I have to say the core of everything I do as a maker and artist is coming from the mouthpiece making point of view. That's where I cut my teeth, and it's where I continue to put my primary focus. Making a mouthpiece requires a great deal more expertise, time, and labor of love than any other product, I think. Perhaps the clarinet is a larger endeavor, but certainly more than barrels or bells or reeds. That said, I have, of course, put a lot of time in the other products as well.
You know, it's interesting because Apple Computers recently did the same thing. A couple years back, they removed the computers part because, you know, they sell iPods and music and all sorts of things now. So if that's any sign of the direction we're heading, I think that's a good, successful sort of choice you've made.
Yeah, well, Apple is one of these brands that has such universal identity, and it's a simple word. And, you know, I look at various products that are successful and their branding efforts. And one of the reasons why, in fact, years ago in 1992, when I started out things, it was Behn Mouthpieces International. And I decided that changing to simply Behn Mouthpieces was simpler. And now I've eliminated the word mouthpieces to a simple Behn brand and a simple logo, which is the interlocking BB, Brad Behn. And I felt by making things visually simple as well as orally simple, it hopefully will have a better branding effort moving forward.
You know, this is so funny because just before we went on air, I was talking about, I was going to try not to go on too many tangents because we've got a lot of products to get through, but I'm already on one here. I'm into a place I want to know something now. So with the Behn brand, I mean, we know that with Google, for example, their sort of branding is the "don't be evil" phrase, and Apple's, summed up in one word was or one sentence was think different, what would Behm's philosophy be summed up in one sentence like that?
More sound, less effort.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, that's kind of the crux of everything that I do, is to make resonance more available, increasing, and therefore it increases your range of expression, your range of dynamics. The comfort can help enable more security with response. And of course, that's crucial. I remember when I was in college and I was executing my phrases just so, boy, it was really different once I got a job in the orchestra. And there's a conductor and a whole 60, 70 musicians sitting around me, expecting me to be on point with my ability to simply play, say, a staccato A right in time. And if you're not in time, everybody notices it. And it was something that was very revealing to me at that time. And soon thereafter, I decided I better find a more efficient setup.
Well, it's interesting because I too was brought up in a very resistant, closed, very closed mouthpiece, very hard read kind of mentality. And as a player, I don't feel that worked for me. Like looking back through even my senior recital, I had different issues with just unpredictable squeaking and that I could not rein in. And it wasn't until several years after graduating when I just threw everything to the wayside and started afresh with something that I didn't really listen to anyone's advice. I just found something that worked for me, and all that went away. So aside from discarding all your previous gear and going against what your teacher says, how can someone find their sort of concept of the sound using this philosophy that you just described with more sound, less effort?
Well, it's I think partly a process. I too, when I was in college, I was very confident that I was producing a beautiful sound and I was getting the job done. But then as time and acoustics and the musical setting evolved, going from a practice room experience at college to a professional experience where I'm having to go on a daily basis to sit in orchestra and in a larger acoustic space with the different kinds of repertoire unfolding, I felt the natural process unfolded where, eventually I would get an easier playing reed with a mouthpiece that enabled more security with response so that I could function with more success. It wasn't that I threw away everything my teacher suggested about the setup. It was just that over the course of time, I evolved into my own personal sweet spot. And I think that was guided, unbeknownst to me at the time, through the truth. I call it the truth in the playing experience, the truth in clarinet. What are the basic parameters that the clarinet is? It's a soprano instrument. It is a reed instrument. It is an instrument that has a volume from nothing. That's the thing we can master. We can play super soft all the way up to perhaps that of a trumpet playing mezzo forte. So we have a true range of dynamics that we responsible clarinet citizenry must try to perfect and play beautifully. There are some lovely clarinetists out there who have a very small range, that is to say, a small range of dynamics. And I'm always inspired by their artistry, but I oftentimes wish, man, just imagine how much more interesting it would be if they would simply open the door and let the range increase to what I think of as a litmus test, something that is the truth in clarinet. That is from nothing to, say, a mezzo forte trumpet sound. I'm not advocating that we play loud all the time, but I am advocating.
I know what you mean, though. If there's no quiet, there can be no loud.
Yeah, that range of expression is so much more effective when we have a larger range available to us of dynamics. And of course, with a range, it goes beyond just dynamics, but to the range of articulation. From the smoothest and most connected legato to the shorter staccato to a marcato, and everything else in between. I mean, some teachers say there are, 3 kinds of articulations: short, medium, and long. And, I think there are infinite kinds of articulations, short and connected and, so forth that I just mentioned. And so to have all of those types of articulations available to us speaks to range. And of course, range can also deal with flexibility, intonational flexibility, as well as what I call nuanceability. You want to be able to nuance a phrase and perhaps let the phrase unfold in such a natural way that you didn't even know you would end up where you did. That comes from a sense of natural fluency and efficiency in the playing experience. I want all of these things to be very easy and available to us as artists. And that's kind of where I begin as a maker.
So regarding the philosophy, just before we move on to the mouthpieces here, there must be a point in which it's kind of like the Goldilocks point. Like you say, less effort, more sound, or was it backwards? More sound, less effort. But there must be a point where there's either just a little too much effort or a little too little effort. And how do you know if you're using not enough effort?
That's a very good question. I think that, it's very common we hear people say, "Oh, I want a very free-blowing mouthpiece." Being a mouthpiece maker, I hear that all the time. Mm-hmm. And I think there's danger here. The danger is that I can make a very free-blowing mouthpiece, but there's always a cost or a consequence of your actions as you design equipment. So, for example, something that is too free becomes harder to control, and perhaps the response becomes blatty, or you have less range of articulation styles available to you. The niente, I call it 0 to 30 miles an hour in the playing experience. From nothing to mezzo piano, it becomes more difficult to control when it's too free. Mm-hmm. Whereas if it's too resistant, the top end becomes confined and stifled. That is, from the mezzo forte to the fortissimo dynamic. It's like you're pushing and pushing, but nothing is going through. You're playing against a stopped tube. Or, for example, a clarinet, you stuff a sock up the bell and play. I feel like when the reed is too hard, I get that sensation. Or if the mouthpiece is too resistant. So ideally, efficiency comes not from freedom, but from the right balance. You need some, what I call working resistance that stabilizes the playing experience. Working resistance can come from 2 different places. One is the reed, or 2 is the mouthpiece. And I prefer to put it in the mouthpiece. Some people think that my mouthpieces have a little bit more resistance than what they might be used to. Some Van Dorens and Zinner blanks, for example, are quite free by comparison. But I do it on purpose because I feel like it's a lot better to put to play a free reed, because I look at the world of clarinet players, and oftentimes I hear the sound of effort, which I find displeasing, and that is coming from playing on harder reeds. A lot of folks play on 4, 4.5, even 5 strength reeds, and I feel like that doesn't do the body good. It's become, we could become tense, and it also can create a fuzzy, fluffy kind of a sound that's I use the word, there's too much crap in the sound, and I joke about it, but you know what I mean. You can hear some or kind of airy quality, and if I hear air just passing through into the sound propagation, that means that there is air that's going from my body through, passing by the reed, that's not being converted into sound, and it's just going through the mouthpiece, and it's complete wasted energy. So what I want is 100% of the air that comes from my body to be converted into reed vibration, and that reed vibration, of course, is turns into sound. That's 100% efficiency. It's not an easy thing to achieve all the time, but it's a good thing to strive for. So there are lots of ways to find the right balance, but a good reed that is free and vibrant but still stable. It plays the altissimo register in pitch when you're playing with a good strong dynamic, yet I can play really soft in the chalumeau with clarity and resonance and projection. One of the things that's very important for me as an orchestral clarinetist is to be able to play pianissimo in the low register and feel like I've got core. And I sit right next to the principal bassoon because I play principal clarinet in the Oklahoma City Philharmonic, and I always find that's a wonderful template, a wonderful thing to try to strive for. Can I match his resonance? He's playing soft and in his formant range. Can I play soft in that same register, down in the low register on the clarinet, and have equal backbone to the body of sound that he's producing in the orchestral context? And that's something that's really a wonderful feeling to achieve. And very few clarinetists are able to do it. I'm not able to do it all the time. It's a good thing to strive for, though. Why is it hard to do? Because he's in his formant register and I'm in the chalumeau register. The formant register on the bassoon is one that's going to project. The formant register on the clarinet is the one that's going to project. But for me, it would be an upper range. So if I'm going down in the lower range on the clarinet and get it to project in a resonant, clean way, it's a joy.
That's also interesting. And that kind of, parallels to my experience that I had with your products. And I first found out about the products that you were making at Clarinet Fest 2015, I believe, in Lawrence, Kansas. And I was quite intrigued at the time. And I have to say that this year, things really seem to have, I don't know if it was just the location or what, but there seemed to be an incredible interest in your products. How was your experience at Clarinet Fest?
We've always done very well at the conferences. I'm proud to say that, we've always come out ahead, and we've had some very good conferences, but this one was more than twice as good as our very best. And we did have a very good location, but I think there was buzz. There was something going on the floor, because we had, we had 4 people working the table, 2 tables, and there were frequently 2 or 3 people deep. 8 across. It was crazy, and I'm thrilled by the response. Everything was kept, no returns. It was just marvelous. Wow. I've had a lot of emails from people saying how it's opened them up, freed them, their new mouthpiece or barrel or whatever has opened them up, freed them. They're creating more resonance, yet better concentration and warmth all together in one package. And that's kind of the fuel that keeps me going when I hear those kinds of responses.
So this is, of course, where I first tried your products for the first time, was Clarinet Fest last year. And then this year I did get the chance to sit down, but like you were saying, it was just so crazy busy. So you generously lent me a couple of your gorgeous mouthpieces here, the Epic series, and also the barrels. And so I brought them home. I was experimenting with them a bit, and I'll be honest, at first it was a little bit odd for me because I am used to using so much air and pressure and effort. And even though I've kind of changed, I'm still on the tail end of that philosophy, mentally, right? So to use your mouthpieces was kind of an interesting experience, because at first I got a little frustrated. I was like, why is this? I'm putting a lot into this, and it's kind of, it wasn't really giving me back to what I wanted. And so I watched your interview with Ed Jaffe, which everyone should check out. I've said that already in the intro to this interview, and also another interview you did with Kristen Denny Chambers, I believe.
Yes.
Well, yeah. So anyway, so I was there watching these videos, and I just thought to myself, I had the mouthpiece on my desk and I'm watching these interesting conversations, and I thought that I needed to go kind of completely into this philosophy you were talking about with lower effort and just let the mouthpiece do what it does. And once I matched the correct reed to the mouthpiece, I was not really prepared actually for what happened. It was an unbelievable sort of response and tone, and the resonance which you talk about so much. It was remarkable. I had a guitar on my wall about 6 feet away from me, and it when I stopped playing the clarinet, I was also so in tune, but the guitar was vibrating sympathetically back at me as if I'd walked over and played it. And I'd never heard anything like that before. And as I let myself kind of get into this mouthpiece, I kind of like discover it and in that way. I'm not sure if that makes complete sense, but it was amazing. So have other people had this experience, and do they have to kind of adapt to this philosophy to make it work and be most happy with it? Or what have other people's experiences been like?
It's great that you mention all of this because, first of all, yeah, I mean, I make mouthpieces different than anything else on the market. And I mean, it could be a lot easier for me. I mean, I've been doing this since 1992. I've had mouthpieces on the market on my own design for my own proprietary wrought rubber since 2005. And during that time, I mean, it's been a long process. It could have been a lot easier for me to just simply make something like everybody else is doing that the mainstream can simply slap their reed on, blow into it, and get immediate results. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to make something better, and I wanted to make the very best thing I could possibly make. I mean, it comes from within. This, I'm basically, the reason why I do this is because I wanted to make a better mouthpiece for myself to play an orchestra on, and I'm still thrilled on a daily basis going to orchestra and reaching into my case and saying, "Ooh, this is my new creation. Let me try it. See how it works." We just played Brahms' Second Symphony in orchestra last night, and I had a case with 4 mouthpieces sitting on the floor, and I'm like, well, which one am I going to play? As I'm warming up on stage with the audience filtering in. And I think I ended up selecting, it was my new mouthpiece design that has yet to come out. I'll tease the audience here a little bit. It's called the Evoke, and it is surrounded by my patented geometric changes in the angle and the posture, that the way we approach the instrument. We can talk more about that later on. But to answer your question, all of these things, the sum of all of these parts, me being so much involved in it, the reed being, benefiting if it's a lighter reed than what we're used to playing on our mainstream equipment. My concept of resonance response balanced by the combination of working resistance with freedom, the freedom that comes from the vibration of the reed, and so on and so forth. It's a learning curve. I tell my clients it takes 2 years. It took me 2 years to learn how to play my mouthpieces. By that I mean it was 2 years where on a daily basis I was discovering something new, joyous, invigorating, inspirational. And I think that speaks to the richness of my product, but it also speaks to how far away I am from the mainstream concept in terms of just being able to put a reed on it, blow, and get immediate go. There's a process. And so one of the reasons why I've been reluctant to go into distribution and have my flagship lines of mouthpieces available at music stores is because I don't think music stores are necessarily equipped with the personnel and the understanding and to be able to have somebody on the showroom floor and simply be able to speak the language of what needs to happen to help the process unfold most beneficially. I mean, you and I had a conversation at the Clarinet Conference back in the end of July, and I encouraged you to try, the lighter reeds, but you still had to go and seek out 2.5 hours worth of interviews, and you had to really have an open mind. And I
consider myself pretty open-minded. It's funny you mentioned that you remember that, because I do remember I came to your booth and you gave me a reed to try with Mouthpiece, and I was, oh no, this one's too soft, too softer. And I insisted, I think I took like a 4 and a 5 reed home with me because I found your reeds were playing a bit soft for me. But then once I went home and found out what worked best, I was like, okay, he was right. The 3.5 is the best. But yeah, I could tell like right away you could hear the so-called crap in the sound and identify which reed was not the best for that mouthpiece, instantly. So you're right. It's difficult to find someone in the average music store who will be able to provide that type of feedback from a clarinetist perspective. And, you're the manufacturer of the product, right? You know what it is you want it to sound like and which direction it should be going. So.
Right. Yeah. I often get comments, I love the sound, but there's something in the feel. And then we have a conversation, whether it be on the phone or through email or ideally face to face. But typically people come at my mouthpieces with too hard of a reed and too strong pressure with the mouth. And ultimately, we have to allow ourselves to release ourselves from the burden of the playing experience and start afresh with a reed that blows through with freedom and security, and then find the embouchure pressures that enable that reed to sound. In other words, come away from the reed rather than grip it in place. We don't need to grip it. We don't need to bite the focus in. Typically on, mouthpieces of other manufacturers, I find that we have to bite the focus in a little bit by comparison as compared to mine.
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, my gear, everything, the other crux of what I do, more sound, less effort, is autofocus. The focus is extremely important to me. And whether it be when I select a reed or when I'm making a mouthpiece, that's the most important, seed that starts the process. I've got to have the focus self-evident. It's got to be there automatically. And so I call it autofocus. If the barrel, when I put the barrel on it, focuses the sound so I can release the embouchure a little bit, that's a good thing, because now I have more resources available to art, to making music, to turning a phrase, rather than gripping in the sound all the time.
See, I think it's so interesting to get into this now. I think we're into something really interesting here, because I did experience this too. Sometimes I would do something to this mouthpiece and expect one thing, and I would find that the opposite would actually achieve that result. So, for example, what you're talking about with gaining focus in the upper register, or even just in the core of the sound, if you apply the pressure, I find it kind of does the opposite. Whereas if you release some pressure, it does that. Has that been a common experience too?
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, if it's working right, you can relax more and get a better sound with more concentration and warmth. And that's when you get that, the focus and the warmth, you get sweetness. And I think we're all looking for sweetness. A lot of times people also talk about a dark sound. I don't really think it's so much that they're looking for a dark sound. They want a more beautifully integrated sound, where the high overtones are blended with the low overtones in a very sort of lovely way, where there's nothing that's spiking out or sounding out of place. It's all blended. Back on the reeds really quickly. I'm a pretty light reed player. Most people play other people's setups. I play a lot of people's setups all the time, and I often, 99% of the time, I feel like I favor something a little bit easier, a little bit freer, a little bit lighter reed. Mm-hmm. Bill Hutchins, I didn't want to spend time dropping names and everything, but I think it's important to note Bill Hutchins, the principal clarinetist of the Boston Symphony, and he's embraced my equipment, and he's playing on my Epic mouthpiece and on my Aria reeds. And every time I've worked with him and I play his setup, I always feel like, oh, this is easier than mine. He's playing on a lighter reed. But then I hear it when he plays, and I hear it in the symphony hall, and then I hear it in the green room, and we work together, and I play his exact setup that I heard when I was in the audience in the hall, and now I'm downstairs in the green room. I experience it's when he plays it, it's so rich and so meaty and so much vitality and effervescence and all of these great things that get me excited about sound. I think he's got a marvelous quality. You can hear it at the very end of the Ed Jaffe interview with Bill. And that is, I think, a great public example of what I consider the ideal. He's achieving more sound with less effort, and it's so beautiful.
So let's get into these products a little bit more, because we've talked a lot about them, but not a lot of the details. And for those who haven't actually experienced themselves, in a way, they look like a normal mouthpiece from a distance. But once you get up close, there's some very different things about them. You're actually, for the Epic line, you're making your own rubber completely from scratch. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
So walk me through that. I mean, are you the only person doing this?
Well, to the extent that I'm making the rubber, yes, and I'll be a little bit detailed about that for you, if you can indulge me. So there are various manufacturing processes for rubber. The authentic way from the pre-war era was to take the rubber and sulfur mixture, the compound, and mix it up, and then it was flattened out like pastry dough, and then by hand rolled into a rod form, and then from there you would place it in a clamshell mold and cook it for a long time at not extremely hot temperature, and this creates this wonderful sounding rubber. It's a combination of the chemical formulation, the ratios, and the cure, the cooking process. Mm-hmm. So, for example, say you have this great chocolate chip cookie recipe, but you don't really know how to cook it. I mean, is it going to be good if you cook it at 2,000 degrees for 30 seconds or at 200 degrees for 30 minutes? Probably neither. You sort of have to find out the sweet spot to get the beautiful, delicious, scrumptious cookie. And the same thing with the hard rubber. Not only, now that we figured out our formulation for the rubber by reverse engineering an old Henri Chedeville mouthpiece that I got from Ron Rubin, we had to determine the cure process, and that came from a great deal of research, looking at old periodical journals, and from the sweet time of the rubber science was back in the turn of the century, from the 1800s to the 1900s and into the early 1900s. There was a great deal of science invested to this modern miracle plastic called hard rubber, and we searched out a lot of that information to find out the optimum cure process. And it's a labor-intensive process, and no one's doing it like that. There's another manufacturing process where it's more common today, and that's called extruding the rubber into the it's compounded and mixed, and then it's extruded through a nozzle into the rod form. And the problem with extrusion is that it's heated, and you have to put some stabilizers into the formula to prevent charring during the extrusion process, and those stabilizers will affect the acoustic sound propagation.
So as far as this goes, I mean, with the vibrations and the better sound and all that, is that something that's subjective, or is there some way that this rubber literally is scientifically more resonant and better? And how would that be determined? Does that question make sense?
Sure. So it's, for the consumer, it's largely subjective because they don't have the expensive apparatus to be able to empirically evaluate. What I did was the lab. Well, it was 2 points. One, we took the Henri Chedeville mouthpiece, and we had to consume about 18 grams of its material to set it aflame for spectrographic analysis, and we did all sorts of other testing, but 18 grams of it were actually destroyed. We still have some material left, from which we put it through a DMA, dynamic mechanical analysis, acoustic frequency sweep, where we set it to sound vibrations and evaluated how it started to resonate and how this material started to sympathetically react, and then used that as the control. That Henri Chedeville rubber was the ideal. And then with we had a compound development program which lasted a few years, where we would the easy part was actually reverse engineering the material formulation of this rubber. But then we had to determine the exact cure process to enable the acoustics to match the Henri Chedeville. And so we had A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, 10 different cooking processes until we hit it. And each one of those cure processes was set to the DMA machine and evaluated during the frequency sweep to see if it would resonate, store and release vibrations and resonance in the same way that the Henri Chedeville did, and we hit it with the number 10 J cure. Property science is very complicated. You can do hardness tests, where you press into the material and the little needle goes in, but then how does it rebound? How long does it take to go how far? That sort of speaks to its viscoelastics, characteristics of the material. How much does it store and release energy, and under what circumstances does it want to release, and under what circumstances does it store? At what temperature does it seem to react most favorably? At 72 degrees or at 14 degrees, Fahrenheit, not Celsius, and so forth. So, we had to find a needle in a haystack, really. And it was extremely exciting and arduous. And I couldn't have done it without wonderful people, scientists who embraced my project. The person who was involved spearheading this project in the lab with me was an amateur violinist, and he was an older gentleman who was nearing the end of his career as a laboratory scientist, and he just embraced me. It's very touching. I mean, I spent a lot of money doing this, but I mean, if he didn't embrace me and the project, it could have been like impossibly expensive, this project to do. Wow. Because the amount of hours and resources and time that was involved. I was very fortunate. People are so important in the process of making great things. Great things generally don't happen on their own, getting people to work with you was something that I was very fortunate to experience.
Well, and I personally had no idea about the level of scientific involvement here, and I imagine that the level of complexity is actually much more difficult than even I am currently understanding. Because to say that you reverse engineer something, it depends on the thing. If it's a cheeseburger you just picked up at McDonald's, I mean, I can look at it and say, okay, there's a bun, there's some lettuce, there's some meat. All right, I can do that at home, But if I get a 200-year-old bottle of some sort of alcohol and have to determine what region it was sourced from and how the grapes were stepped on or whatever, I mean, that's a totally different thing. And this sounds more like the latter than the former.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I remember when I was getting started, they said, well, do you want the comprehensive reverse engineering, or do you want the short version? And I said, well, what's the difference in cost? And I determined that, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to spend my retirement, I'm going to do it right. And so we went for the comprehensive. And so we were able to evaluate all the chemicals, all the materials, and the ratios with precision in the hard rubber. And like I said, that was just the beginning, because then we had to figure out what the cure was to fully enhance and take advantage of the acoustics that were available to us. But it requires scientists. It requires people who are, dedicated towards the science of rubber. This is not something that I could do myself. I mean, I certainly wasn't arrogant enough to assume that I could just go and make this material on my own. I'm not a rubber scientist. I'm a clarinet player. And I was very fortunate to work hard in the early stages of, and I had a lot of zeal. I was very, very determined to make my own mouthpiece and to make it as good as I possibly could. So I researched and worked really hard, but eventually, I remember I was talking on the phone when I was just getting started. I would, I looked in back then you'd look in the phone book, the white pages or early internet searches to try and find, rubber manufacturers. Hey, I want to make this old rubber from an old mouthpiece. Can you do this? And, I called hundreds of people, and I kept on getting the same sort of thing answer, which was essentially no. And then finally, I spoke with somebody, and he was like, this is interesting, but it's not for me. But you got to contact this person. And so I contacted this person, and this person ended up being a godsend. He was the person who was that person I mentioned before who took me under his wing, and with the resources of a full laboratory specializing in rubber science, I feel very confident that through the passion and through the people and through the knowledge that they had, that we got something very special.
Well, this merger between science and music and the arts, I think it's actually very interesting. And it's very interesting to me, too, that sometimes the person who can take something like a clarinet to the next level is not a musician. They're an engineer or a scientist or something like that. And it's interesting to see how science and art are sort of intermingling in this way. And it'd be interesting to see what happens in the future, even with these kind of products.
I think it's fantastic that we have such, modern science available to all of us now. The fact that you and I are speaking in intimate setting from thousands of miles apart,
and then it will be listened to all over the world.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. It's a wonderful era for exploration. But the objective subjective thing. So obviously it was objective in the lab, but to answer your question earlier on, of course the consumer, the mouthpiece client or the barrel client and so forth, they don't have the resources of a lab necessarily to make those empirical observations. They're just doing it on their own. They're using their ears and their artistic sensibility to evaluate, and I think that's great too. It's got to touch your heart.
Yeah, I see the point. Subjectivity is important. It comes down to, do you like the sound of something versus some other thing? But in a way, yeah. I fear that sometimes our subjectivity as musicians is clouded by a sense of mythology or something not so valuable. Oh, well, my teacher did this, or so-and-so plays this, so I should too, or,
Yeah, and, that's actually very true. As we leave the academic setting and then we learn how to be our own person, I think of when I was in my teens, I was learning how to play the clarinet. And then when I was in my 20s, I was learning how to apply what I learned in school. And then when I was in my 30s, I was learning how to be my own man. Mm-hmm. And now I just turned 50 a couple of days ago. It's a whole new world of exploration. I'm free. I feel very confident in my ways, but very liberated by having, since my 30s now, I've had 20 more years to sort of tie up loose ends and develop a real strong sense of what works and what doesn't work for me. I've been able to step outside of all the confinements of various expectations and demands that other people put upon me, and now I'm just able to explore things on my own. And I think that process is kind of true for many. It's you can put it on your own terms, but as we grow in adulthood and to allow those learning years to unfold, sure enough, we'll find things that maybe somebody told us along the way that we don't necessarily agree with, or we think, my gosh, why didn't teacher tell me that? It didn't seem to make sense when they told me, but wow, now it makes sense 20 years later. I was joking with some old clients and friends. I consider all my clients friends, but these ones are very special. They go back many years, and we were at the table at the very end of the third day of the clarinet conference. And we were joking, they're Stanley Hasty students, and I'm a Robert Marcellus student. And we were joking about the things that, why didn't they tell me that? Why didn't they? And I said, we should do a podcast on what Stanley Hasty and Robert Marcellus didn't tell us.
We should, yeah. Are you talking about us?
I was talking about it with those guys, like an interview, and of course, you're the guy that should do it because you're so well known in the podcast music scene.
Well, hey, that would be a hilarious series. That'd be awesome. So if they want to do that.
It's a wonderful upside down way to look at the pedagogy of these great master teachers of the last generation, but which would, I think, very interestingly allow their pedagogy to unfold, but also the spirit of the person you're interviewing to speak of it and to explore their own pedagogy and how it's affected their real world demands and needs as a clarinet player.
Well, absolutely. And, I don't want to, disparage the advice of teachers, but it is true, though, you do have to find your own sound and stuff. But someone recently commented on the website, for example, something, I can't remember, it was one of the products I'd reviewed. I think it was the Bakun clarinets, and they were really interested in purchasing one, but their big concern was, oh, well, I don't know any big artists that play on that. And I sort of commented like, well, okay, I mean, first of all, here are some that do, but does that really affect your decision? Like, if you really feel it's a comfortable choice for you, I mean, why are you shying away from it, But I've been in that same boat. I mean, why do I own, one of the guitars I owned is called, it's a limited edition. It's one of only 1,000 or something like that, but it's a laminated bamboo top. And honestly, the only reason I own it is because I'm a clarinet player. And what would be a cooler guitar for a clarinet player to own than that, So I'm kind of in the same thing. Like, oh, all the big rock stars play that guitar, and man, it looks so cool. I mean, so I own it. But so it's tough to get out of that sort of mindset and really explore artistically. But and the guidance of your teacher is important, but it's also important to, like you said, find your own sort of direction through all these things.
I think that when we're at a point in our careers where we can really explore ourselves, it's just so exciting musically. I mean, the little old lady in the audience that's hearing your clarinet playing doesn't really care that you studied with Robert Marcellus or Stanley Hasty or anyone else. What keeps her from falling asleep is when you turn a beautiful phrase. And frankly, it's not necessarily if you have a beautiful sound, although that, we clarinetists are very, very interested in beauty of sound. But what she's looking for is a good phrase. And I think that it's important that we remember that music. And if your setup is hindering your ability to make beautiful music, then it's time to explore things, regardless of what your guidance in the past by your teachers has been. I often get younger players, college-age players and things. I'm looking for a dark tone. I'm looking for a free-blowing mouthpiece, and my immediate reaction, which I rarely say directly, is, well, why would you want a dark tone? Mm-hmm. And why do why? And what's the deal with free blowing? I mean, that's easy, right? Just, find a reed that's a little bit easier playing. But no, what they want is a dark tone with the same hard reed that they're using. I find for most clarinetists, it's a lot easier to change mouthpieces than it is to change reed strength. And I find that the strangest thing in the world, but it's so common. They're stuck on their hard reed formula that, I can't change that. It would make my world upset. As far as the dark thing, I have vision accessible to me, and I feel very fortunate to have my senses, sound, taste, vision, so on. So why would I want to go in the room on and turn the lights off so I can no longer see? That's eliminating one of my senses, primary senses now that I have fortunately available to me. And I think the same thing with tone and the word dark. So why would I want to take stuff out of my sound?
Yeah.
Sound should be a combination of all the overtones, the lowest overtones, the middle overtones, and the highest overtones. I welcome them all, bring them all to the plate. So now I have a painter's palette with all the colors available to me, and then I construct it and voice it in a way that serves the music available to me. Sure, I played Brahms last night, and so I voiced it more Brahmsian. And when we're doing Berlioz, I'll voice it a little bit more Berliozian, whatever that means to me. But, to darken something just to make it dark eliminates a great world of choice that I think is serving the art. I want all the colors available to me as a clarinetist. And I find it sad that this word dark has become such a positive. I think bright. Here's another interesting thing. When I was teaching a young student, she was very young. She was actually almost too small to hold the instrument and have her fingers cover the tone holes and such. And I invited her to the orchestra concert, and I asked her, "Did you like the Mozart or the other piece?" It was a contemporary piece of music by Donald Grantham. And I said, "Which one did you like better?" And she goes, "Oh, I liked the Grantham piece better." And I said, "Why?" "Because it was bright." And I said, "That's interesting. So you like it because it was bright. What an interesting choice of words." So then the next week in lesson, I brought 2 different reeds, and I said, "Which sound do you like better?" I played reed 1, which was the dark reed, and reed 2, which was the bright reed. And this girl, she was so young and new to music. She didn't know anything about music. She was just coming from her own innocent, pure point of view. And she said, "Oh, I like that reed better." And I said, "Why?" "Because it's bright." And, I should say both of these reeds were good representatives of dark and good representatives of bright. I wasn't like, when we think of the word bright, we typically think of it as a negatively associated word. I'm trying to remove the negative and just bright good versus dark good. But nonetheless, I think somebody in a very basic, innocent, unbiased setting might surprise us for what is better. And I think that she was responding to the life in the sound that the slightly brighter reed produced. When it's a darker sound, we typically are voicing it so that the lower overtones are more apparent and the upper ones less so, and it becomes a little thicker and a little bit I'm using biased words now, duller and less interesting. And whereas the sound with all the overtones available to it, I think has a little bit more sparkle. And I find that quite appealing. So bright good wins the day as far as I'm concerned. And I think that was what maybe, Sean, you were experiencing when you started to get used to my mouthpiece. When you got the reed set a little bit easier blowing, and your embouchure maybe sort of migrated into a way that enabled a lighter reed to vibrate warmly and with ring and resonance, which I think was really that story where you said the guitar started to resonate sympathetically. That speaks to me.
With the vibrations and the resonance you're trying to achieve, which ligature is best matched with these mouthpieces? Because the ligature is something that, of course, has a huge effect on the response and resonance of the clarinet.
Well, there are generally 2 camps of ligatures, the cloth style ligature and the metal style ligature. I've always liked metal ligatures. My teacher Marcellus got me on a Bonod ligature with the center cut out, and it's a 2-screw ligature. And so I've always sort of had that in my system. But then over the course of time, I've explored and tried many different things. I found that cloth ligatures can sometimes have a little bit more free, flexible characteristics and maybe a little bit more cover to the sound. So I think, a ligature is a personal choice. I don't necessarily think that you have to play X ligature on Y mouthpiece. But I think it's worth everyone taking time to explore to find the formula that works for them. That said, my formula has been and continues to be metal, 2-screw, instead of 1, and inverted. And there are a variety of things in addition to that are important to me. One of primary importance is it's got to stay on. It's amazing how few ligatures stay on when I switch from B flat to A clarinet. In Mahler's 4th Symphony, you're going back and forth so fast that if anything goes wrong, it's a bad thing. And so I got to be able to tighten that ligature with both screws and have the ligature feel comfortable in my hand. This is the second thing. When I grab it to go from B flat to A, I don't want to hurt my hand. Some ligatures have a big screw with sharp edges that when I grab with the palm of my hand, it hurts. So number one, it's got to stay on. 2, it's got to not hurt. 3, it's got to be metal. 4, it's got to have 2 screws. And the metal has to be thick enough so I feel like it's really makes a solid sound. I don't want to play the clarinet where the reed feels like it's slipping out from under me. The equivalent of the rug being pulled out from under my toes. Mm-hmm. A good, firm, tightly gripped ligature. I feel like the reed is clamped on in such a way that the reed is giving me full, crisp response. If I just lightly tighten it with a cloth ligature, sometimes I feel like the sound can go to spread more easily, and it might not respond with as much precision. Sometimes people, when they crank the ligature down, they feel like it tightens up, it stymies the vibration. And I think that there is that risk. So you want to have a metal ligature, which when you crank it tight, it still allows the reed to vibrate well. Or you got to be willing to select your reed properly for a well-tightened ligature. Again, going to the right reed for the right setup.
Well, it's interesting because I've been trying this mouthpiece with several different ligatures, and I like your sort of list of practical reasons to choose one ligature over another too, because I kind of feel that way as well. The one I find actually works most interestingly with it, and sort of the tonal philosophy and the response and everything, actually is a Florian Popa wooden band ligature.
Interesting.
I found it is very interesting, but the problem that I'm having with that ligature, though, and I hope to talk to Florian about that soon on the podcast here. We've been trying to connect for some time, but it is rather difficult to switch between the instruments because it's the kind of thing where it's removed by twisting, So when you want to grab the mouthpiece and put it on your other clarinet, it is difficult to move it, and of course, his ligatures are quite popular with sax players where that's not an issue, but. But yeah, I'd be interested to find out how that could be improved with that product. But there are other ligatures too, which are great. They sound wonderful, but they are just hard to move around. So it's a practical consideration.
Yeah, I think the practical consideration from my point of view as an orchestral clarinetist, where I have to go from B flat to A all the time, is it's a large enough issue that we should all take note. But for some of us, it simply doesn't matter because we're not going back and forth from B flat to A. And in that case, it opens up the choice greatly. My colleague uses a string type of a ligature, and so in the orchestra, and so she actually grabs onto the mouthpiece from the sides of the mouthpiece on the beak, and I think that pinching and grabbing it's for me. I wouldn't want to do it because I think that I'd be too concerned that I might just move the reed a little bit.
Yeah.
And change how the reed feels. I'm very, very finicky about, whenever I play the instrument, I want to have it feel the same as the last time. So if I have a few measures rest, I typically put the mouthpiece cap right back on top over the setup to keep the reed in a humidity controlled atmosphere. I want like I say, obviously the ligature's got to hold the reed properly and securely because it's got to be a reliable playing concern. I mean, can you imagine having to play something touchy in orchestra and you start playing and the reed had moved and all of a sudden you don't know what's going to happen. So it's very important to me. I personally endorse Charles Bay ligatures and Ishimori ligatures. I think those are those two fit all the criterion of just practicality, and I also like the way they sound. That said, I've not tried the Popa ligature. It sounds like it wouldn't pass my criterion on being able to stay on, but there are many ligatures out there, and it's fun to try them. I haven't tried them all.
Hard to try them all. There's so many.
Yeah, I've been playing a Ishimori solid silver with pink gold plating on it lately, which I've been enjoying a lot.
So your products, one of the things I find interesting is that you have the Epic line, which is a comparatively expensive mouthpiece, contrasted with a lot of these sort of mass-produced ones that exist, approaching $800 on that end of the spectrum. And you're on your website too. You even suggest that people, as they come to try these mouthpieces, there's various hotels listed to stay at while they do this. So they really are kind of selecting a career mouthpiece. And then all the way to the other end of the spectrum there, you've got some beginner student models that are under $40. So how do you achieve such a spread like this? And how does someone identify where they fit in on your product line?
Oh, great questions. Well, basically I've tried to make it as easy as possible by on the Mouthpiece page on my website, basically helping you determine what level you are, level 1, 2, or 3. And basically I define it as student or, like beginning student, which could be not only a beginning student, but if you need a spare mouthpiece for the marching band or something and you're in high school or even in college, that would be my Overture $35 mouthpiece. And then level 2, that would be if you're an amateur, a professional who doesn't really have great interest in mouthpieces, or a college age student. That mouthpiece is a professional level mouthpiece. It's competitive with any professional product on the market. It's just my lower priced option, and that would be I have some mouthpieces made from Zinner blanks, or my Sono line, which is made from a less expensive rod rubber with my manufacturing process. And then my most expensive line, level 3, is my Epic line, which is made from a proprietary rod rubber, which is that expensive process I mentioned earlier of making the rubber with all the science involved, as well as have very unique options in design and facings. I can customize anything you want. I can basically sit down and work one-on-one or through the email. We can communicate to make an artistic product for an elite clientele of connoisseurs and professionals, and that would be the Epic.
You also designed a mouthpiece that has sort of a tilt to it. Would you tell me about that for a minute?
Yeah, sure. So the tilted mouthpiece, some people call it the bent mouthpiece, or the one with a funny angle. It kind of looks quite different than traditional mouthpieces. Basically, the idea is to allow the clarinetist to hold the instrument in a more comfortable manner. You don't change the angle the mouthpiece is in relationship to your embouchure in your mouth. That all remains the same as you would play with any other mouthpiece. But the difference is that the angle that the mouthpiece is inserted into the clarinet is tilted forward rather than leaning back. A traditional mouthpiece is set where the table is set back between 4.5 and about 6 degrees. A Zinner mouthpiece is at about 6 degrees. A Van Doren is at about 5 degrees. And most of the really fine vintage mouthpieces of the past were set at about 4.5 to 4.25 degrees. And so I have made a series of mouthpieces where the angle is now tilting a little bit more forward from 0 degrees, -2 degrees, and -4 degrees. So you've got a differential between, say, a Van Doren of between 5 and 9 degree difference. And that's enough to notice, but it's not enough to throw you off. And so what that ultimately allows you to do is to have your head in a more upright position. So if I'm if I'm playing in the orchestra, I'm not looking down at my music anymore. I'm actually looking outward towards the conductor. Conductor's happier. He feels like he's getting eye contact with me. And I have much better vision to my music and peripherally to the conductor as well. I don't need to strain on my bifocal lenses anymore. It's all focus. Yeah. And to add to that, you can imagine if your angle of the instrument is such that the is further out, like, a lot of clarinetists play the instrument because of their natural embouchure, their bite configuration, so that the angle of the instrument is kind of outward. It's not horizontal to the ground, but it's certainly not vertical either. It's probably, most people are something like bringing back the trumpet again, but it's sort of like a trumpet angle down. And that puts all the weight of the instrument out on your elbows. and on wrists. And so with this angle geometric change, it really holds the instrument's weight on your shoulders, a much stronger part of your core, part of your body. And so it allows you to hold the instrument in a comfortable posture without as much strain on your bones. I had tennis elbow for a long time, a year and a half, which had I had this mouthpiece going at the time, it would have been much more comfortable.
Well, I can even identify with that too, because I like to hold my clarinet, myself, I guess. I have a bad habit of kind of putting my head down a bit. And I found that with using this, I'm able to sit much more comfortably with better posture. And down the line, you do have to be worried about things like tennis elbow or tendonitis and any sort of strain and tension, kind of resolving that. And simply telling a person to lift their head up may not be the solution, because depending on their sort of physical nature, they might actually not be able to play as well.
Yeah, I think it's dangerous for teachers. I see it oftentimes with students. They have TMJ or jaw problems, and I say, well, how did that develop? And they said, well, my teacher told me to angle the instrument closer to my body, and I think that's a dangerous thing. I mean, we all have our own unique physiology and jaw structure, and we need to respect our natural, comfortable sweet spot for playing the clarinet. And then from there, find the equipment to best suit the individual. Rather than be a cookie cutter. I'm a Marcellus student, and Marcellus had a huge overbite. I mean, it was massive. He could keep his mouth essentially closed and still have a slot open into which he could insert the mouthpiece in an almost vertical position. The danger is then many Marcellus students told their students to play like Marcellus and to play with a more vertical posture, and that can cause issues, like I mentioned before. So I think make sure that you find comfort in everything that you do.
Well, these health issues are so important. I remember at Clarinet Fest 2007, actually, I saw a presentation for something which to me had been rather poignant at the time. And that was, I think it's called a palatial air leak. Like you've got air leaking kind of from your nose while you're playing. And looking back, this doesn't happen to me anymore, by the way. Since I've switched to softer reeds and a lighter setup, I don't get the squeaking, I don't get the leaking. And I think it's honestly caused by just way too much pressure in the mouth coming out in places you don't want it.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah. That tension has to escape somewhere. And if it doesn't, escape from your sinuses, it can't come out your mouth. There's too much,
Exactly. That back pressure is just causing your body to leak. I think that we need to accept the clarinet for what it is. There are certain truths to the playing experience. And, if we add resistance because we're requesting for some kind of a sound that is causing our body harm, we're doing something wrong. And chances are the thing that's wrong is that concept in our head that's guiding us down an unhealthy road. And so sometimes the solution isn't necessarily that we have to change, how we play, but we need to change what we play. And that is to say, find a lighter reed, find a mouthpiece that allows the air to accept the wind. And then additionally, this is the one no one really thinks about. Maybe we ought to change our concepts. Maybe we ought to realize that, hey, the clarinet is a soprano instrument, and there are high overtones in the mix, and those high overtones are part of what makes the clarinet sound bright and, I dare say, beautiful. And rather than to dampen all of those upper partials with harder setup, maybe we ought to just embrace the ring that comes from a lighter reed.
Well, and we can't escape physics. I mean, for every action, there's an opposite reaction, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Way it goes.
Yeah.
So you also offer a line of barrels, bells, E-flat clarinet extensions as well, and those are all rubber products. Is that the same proprietary rubber? And if not, is there a plan to make those products with that rubber too?
It's not my proprietary rod rubber. I have two different materials. One is Behn proprietary rod rubber, and the other one is Behn rod rubber 2. And basically, the rubber 2 is the same material that I use in sono mouthpieces and in all of my accessories, which include barrels and bells. And I'm hopeful that down the line, who knows where it goes, but maybe, an instrument might come down the line.
Ooh.
Yeah. but I don't want to promise anything. It's got to be the right instrument. It's got to work before it goes to market.
It's funny you mention that, because I was actually going to ask, you've replaced so many parts of the instrument. At what point do you just make an instrument? And is that kind of where you're at? You're considering that?
I am. And, as I've been in the industry long enough, I've really, I mentioned people and how that scientist was embracing me. And now I've been in the industry long enough where I can I've gotten to know many of the people involved, and I have, I'm not a clarinet maker. I'm a orchestral clarinetist who also is a mouthpiece maker and barrel and bell maker. But when it comes to an instrument, that's something that I would seek the counsel of experts who are friends and who have concept and ability in instrument making that is such that I feel like I can get something that fulfills all of my values. And I've been speaking with somebody about that, which is, we'll see where it goes, but it's very promising.
That's very exciting.
Yeah, it's not necessarily ever going to be my bread and butter. It's not going to be, my primary goal. Like I said earlier, I think the mouthpiece is the hub of everything that I do. It informs me as a clarinetist as well as an acoustician and a maker of products. But if I can get a clarinet on my own design, made in an artistic way from materials that are impressive to me, then I'd like to explore that to fully seal the deal, right? From tip to stern, bow to stern, I've got the full product. That's a dream, right? And it's good to have dreams.
Well, and given the regulations being put on certain types of wood these days and the availability concerns of wood, this might be where the clarinet is headed. So you might be on the forefront of something, the future of the clarinet in that sense.
Yeah. Wood is the historical material from which clarinets are made. But I have to tell you, I really have been impressed by the acoustics of my rod rubber and my Behn rubber 2 as well. The Behn rubber 2 is material that is extruded, but I've really done the very best that I could to create the formula that and the cure to include the extrusion process that can come as close to Behn proprietary rod rubber in its acoustics. So this isn't just regular extruded rubber. This is rubber that is made specifically and my designs are made sympathetically to create the most epic-like playing experience I can make at an affordable price point. And I'm not sure that I'll make accessories from Behn from Behn proprietary rod rubber, the expensive stuff, because, who wants to pay $700 for a barrel? I don't know. When you got like a 39 millimeter bore or something, it's not as important as the mouthpiece, because the mouthpiece, some people say, the material doesn't matter with a mouthpiece. And I totally disagree. Although I will say that the design and the facing are more influential on the playing experience than the material. Mm-hmm. But the material does make a difference. I've made mouthpieces with the same exact design from various plastics and various rubber to include, my special stuff, and they all have a different playing experience. Rubber in general, and plastics too, have more stability than wood.
Yes.
Wood, as it expands and contracts time and time again, it eventually doesn't come back to its original measurements. The bore becomes ovoid, and eventually it blows out. And the great thing about the rubber material is you get a really nice vibrancy and stability. And I can play my barrel 10, 15 years from now, and I know it's going to be essentially the same as it is today.
Yeah, which is an important thing, the longevity of it, and especially when you plan to use something for a long duration, such as your career. So
the instrument makers, they've got to cure the wood, they've got to let it age. They sometimes, kiln dry it and do all of these things just to try to make sure that it doesn't warp out on them, just for that simple reason. And then, they still have problems. Like barrels, oftentimes, there are these big chunky fat wood barrels because they have to make it with a certain wall thickness to try to mitigate the potential of cracking or from the tenons expanding or contracting in such a way that you can't fit the parts together very effectively as humidity and dryness in the atmosphere change. So, from a functionality point of view, it's quite apparent to me that synthetic materials, to include rubber, are superior to wood. The subjective argument is, but how does it sound? Well, I've been playing in an orchestra, the barrels as well as my mouthpieces now for, the barrels and the bells are newer to me. I've been doing them now for a couple of years in orchestra, and I think it sounds great. In fact, I think it sounds better than the wood. I'm the maker. They're my babies. Of course, I'm going to think that. Let the marketplace decide.
No, absolutely. And, one last product we should touch on real quick is your reeds. And they're, of course, your newest offering. What do you have to say about your new line of reeds?
First of all, I'm delighted by the response. I'm personally playing them. I played the concert last night on an aria number 4. Worked really well on the Brahms Second Symphony. But I've had a great response. Going back to Bill Hudgens, he and I collaborated time and, we had a good spirited discussion one time on mouthpieces that led to reeds. And here we are a couple of years later with the aria reed. He's playing them as well. The idea came to me because when I, mentioned earlier that my mouthpieces kind of take a conversation, a relationship with my clients and let the process unfold. But a lot of times I'm involved. We communicate by email. Have you tried a lighter reed? Maybe if you scrape it this way, and then they get back to me with their observations. And certainly at clarinet conferences, when I'm working face to face with clients, sure enough, they'll put their reed on my mouthpiece and I can hear the sound of effort. They're working too hard. They're working too hard on their own setup. They've built into this weird sense that through resistance comes good depth of sound. And that's not the case with my mouthpieces. So, I oftentimes, for the last 10 years, I would say, here, try this reed. And sure enough, it might be like a Van Doren 3.5 blue box, or even a 3-strength blue box. It could be a D'Addario, remember those old red box Rico reeds, in a lighter strength. And sure enough, they play and they're like, oh my gosh, the sound, it just opened up. It's so much more full. It's darker, it's warmer, it's richer, it's brighter, it's everything. And so my wife and I, 3 or 4 years ago, we just started talking, if we could come up with a reed that has the word Behn on it rather than Van Doren or D'Addario or something else, it would benefit my whole presentation. I mean, I think those other companies that I look at, Van Doren and D'Addario, they have their own mouthpiece and their own reed. And I think that sort of closes the deal. Now we're presenting a package. It's not like you have to play on a Behn reed to make good results on my Behn mouthpieces, but it somehow makes the whole thing seem like a system. It seems more real. And it's certainly, in my case, with my products being that they're different, so much different than other products on the market, it helps the client get there quicker. Mm-hmm. By there, I mean to the good place. And so we decided to commit to designing our own reed. And several years later, I don't know, it's been maybe 8 months now that they've been on the market. They've been a marvelous hit. We've sold, thousands of boxes. It's been crazy.
Well, you're right, though, because when you go to another company's booth, I mean, generally they have the reeds to go with the mouthpiece. You select the mouthpiece to match the selection of your reed and vice versa. And you kind of you work with it that way. It would be, what's the best thing to complement your Van Doren mouthpiece? Is probably the Van Doren reed that they have right there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're onto something with that. Well, Brad, I want to thank you so much for coming on the Clarinet podcast today. Before we close, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I'd like to say thank you very much, Sean. It has been a pleasure getting to know you at the conferences. I look forward to seeing you at the next one. Hopefully we'll see you at TMEA in February. And thank you.
Well, everyone listening, you can find Brad's Mouthpieces at www.clarinetmouthpiece.com. And for the show notes for this episode at clarinet.com, I will provide links to anything that we mentioned throughout our conversation. So thank you so much, Brad, for coming on the show, and I look forward to our next meeting as well.
Thanks, Sean. Me too.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Clarinet Podcast. If you find that you're enjoying the show, please consider supporting it. You can do this at www.clarinet.com/Patreon. Patreon backers get access to all kinds of different bonus content, and at the gold level, which is $10 per month, you get access to extended, ad-free versions of episodes just like this one. Today's conversation with Brad Behn features almost 10 minutes of additional content that you don't want to miss. Be sure to tune in next time for a conversation about the podcast itself. I want to give a bit of a stats update, discuss some of where it's going, and I also want to share, I guess I'll share it now, but we're nearing 100,000 downloads of this show, so I'm going to be announcing an extra special sort of giveaway. And also, if you check out the Facebook group before September 30th and on September 30th, I'm going to be putting out a call to action for listener engagement and involvement with the upcoming episode. That'll come out on Monday, and I look forward to seeing you then.
Sanding, shaping, balancing. For centuries, mastering your instrument meant mastering these crafts too. But now, D'Addario is refining craftsmanship for the 21st century by refining their reeds and mouthpieces with the world's most innovative techniques, so you can spend less time sanding, shaping, and balancing, and more time perfecting your own craft. To learn more about the new era of craftsmanship from D'Addario Woodwinds, visit D'Addario.com/woodwinds.